and I do not think of as particularly old. There are a lot of barriers in the way. It's something that Ian Henschke, who's the Chief Advocate for National Seniors Australia, has been working on, if you will forgive the pun on that one. Ian, good morning.
Oh, good morning, Nick. Yes, you're absolutely right. There's a lot of ageism out there, but our human rights should not diminish as we age. Now, I didn't make that up myself. I'm quoting from the wonderful Age Discrimination Commissioner who was in my town, Adelaide, yesterday, and she talked about the wonderful work of the first Age Discrimination Commissioner, Susan Ryan, and she referred to her work. She wrote a report, or had a report commissioned back in 2012 called The Grey Army Advances, and it pointed out that if we use the resource of older Australians, it would add, now these figures are extraordinary, more than $50 billion to the economy of Australia. Now, you might say, how does that work? Well, if you've got, let's just say, for example, at the moment, we've got around 5 million Australians, over the age of 60. Well, if they are not in the workforce, even if you had 10% of them in the workforce, you would have 500,000 people in the workforce. That means you don't have to bring in hundreds of thousands of migrants because you're actually using your own labour resource. Now, this particular paper was written by Deloitte. I think it was Chris Richardson, the famous economist you often have on the ABC. And he said even a 3% increase in the older workforce would add $36 billion to GDP. Now, if you go back to the last election, Mr. Frydenberg and I think Mr. Chalmers did a sort of face-off at the press club, and they talked about what the percentage of tax was to GDP, and I think it was somewhere around the 20% mark. So you're talking about the missing out of $10 billion of extra tax that would come, because when people work, they pay GST, they get payroll tax, they get all this. So using our older Australians and seeing them as an asset and not a liability is what we have to do. I mean, the culture that we create today is going to be the culture that we inherit. By the way, I didn't make that one up either. That was the wonderful Dr. Kay Patterson as well. So these are the elders. We talk about respect for the elders, and you have these. Every time they meet, they say, "Oh, we pay respect to the elders." When we talk about the Indigenous community, we need to pay respect to the elders, whatever community there is, and actually mean it. Walk the walk and talk the talk and do it properly.
Ian, older Australians want to work. We're seeing the numbers that you just mentioned about what it would mean to the economy. Where's the sticking point? Why aren't they getting the jobs they want?
Because the government is ageist. The government is ageist because the government reflects the society. The Treasury is ageist. I mean, Kay Patterson told me yesterday that she was the person who brought in the $6,000 work bonus, and that would have been decades ago. It's now $7,800. So they let a person work on a pension, and once they get beyond $7,800, they lose 50 cents in the dollar, and they get, because they see the pension as welfare. So when someone gets the pension, they see them as a welfare recipient, and then the first thing they would like to do is punish them if they work, because they say, we want that money back. We want that money back. So we've created this system where it's actually a penalty to work more than 1 day a week because you get 50 cents in the dollar off your pension, and then they charge you income tax on top of that. So you might be losing 69 cents in the dollar at the lower levels, and you could actually lose 80 cents in the dollar if you actually kept working. So if you go to New Zealand, for example, where they don't have this system, where they do seem to want to have people working, and they have a pension system there where 25% of the over 65s are in the workforce, 45%, the 65 to 70-year-olds are still in the workforce, and they have a very viable economy. I mean, considering New Zealand's not sitting on a vast gold mine and iron ore mine and all that, they managed to run a pretty good country.
And just to dive in on this though, is it that can't be the only barrier? I mean, if people want to work, if there's that barrier there, but do employers want them? Because I've had people texting and calling suggesting that maybe there's an issue on the employer side as well.
Okay, I'll tell you what's happening. At the moment, it's the best time ever to actually go and get a job, because I can tell you where they want them. They want them in hospitality. They want them in retail. They want them in the supermarkets. They want them in the cafes. They want them in the hotels. They want them everywhere. You know, I mean, there may be people out there who say, look, I applied for a job as an account executive with an advertising agency. We'll pick something out because you're talking about Jane Caro before, you know, and they might say, oh, they went for the younger person rather than the older person. Look, maybe that's because that agency just chose to do that, and that is probably ageism. It's very hard to prove too. It's very hard to prove ageism in that instance. But if you look at ageism in government sectors, it's rampant. The government is the worst of all. They do things like say, oh, we want to, I mean, at one stage they were giving redundancies to nurses, they were giving redundancies to teachers because they wanted to, as they say, rejuvenate their workforce. I mean, they were doing that as government policy. And you'd know that having worked in the ABC. The ABC, every now and again when there's something there, they say, oh, we're going to offer redundancies to, they always offer redundancies to the older workers because they want to get them out and get younger workers in. And yet the ABC has a chairperson, who's in her early 80s. I mean, Ita Buttrose is a classic example of what you were talking about before. That lady said she did Pilates every day. My understanding is that Ita Buttrose exercises every day. She exercises her mind every day. She chairs a corporation which is more than $1 billion in funding with 4,000 employees. And yet, if Ita Buttrose went into the corporate world, you know, she'd probably find that some people would say, oh, you know, I don't know, she might be too old. They've even suggested that with her. I mean, ageism is ingrained in our society. And if we do not fix that, if we do not change that, we are going to diminish not only the older person's lives, but we're going to diminish our society. So I challenge Jim Chalmers. I challenge Anthony Albanese. This white paper that they've just called for, which we put a submission in, we said, let the pensioners work, let anyone who wants to work, and don't penalise them. And see what happens just for 2 years. Just try the New Zealand system for 2 years and see what happens.
Ian, just hold the line for a minute there, because